So the difficulty in discerning between the object of reality and the concept of reality. Returning to the metaphor of existence as a film, the object of reality in this example is the actual film strip. The concept of reality in this example is all the abstractions we dream up while watching the film. But no concept about reality is going to change the raw facts of that film strip. All the abstractions in the world will not alter the course of any image on any frame. All of the frames are already determined. So no, it isn't movie plot that decides or changes anything. And all the characters in the film don't have any choice but to behave how they behave. They have no other alternative. Let us not confuse the narrative of cause and effect with the tangible object of cause and effect. And yes, I would think that the neurological experiments do effectively reinforce determinism. The experiments show that the subconscious has already made a decision before the conscious is even aware of it. The evidence from the experiments institutes a standard to work with, and from this standard, it is evident where the burden of proof becomes established. The facts point towards actions being predetermined to any cognitive function, and communication is definitely a cognitive function. Hence, suggestions of otherwise bear the burden. Communication affects the brain. Unfounded assumption that bears the burden of proof. A response from an object is indicative of communication. Unfounded assumption that bears the burden of proof. Thoughts and feelings have the ability to cause events and affect objects. Unfounded assumption that bears the burden of proof. If you are ever able to successfully reify these things you are calling thoughts, feelings, and communication, then maybe we can get them into the laboratory and run some experiments that might bolster some of those declarations. Until then, we have to stick to raw material facts that can be observed and measured. Explanations involving thoughts and feelings aren't succinct. To say something is meant to happen, what I said, isn't the same thing as saying something should happen, what I didn't say. Asserting something was meant to happen means that the hard facts point to the truth that the objects were pre-situated in such a way so as to lead to a specific condition. Asserting something should happen means one thinks that feelings, thoughts, and intentions can guide circumstances to a specific condition. They are two completely different denotations. Me saying that a material configuration need not be judged isn't related to the idea of agency whatsoever, and is consistent to a scientific process. The objects interact with each other in a determined fashion. Hence, there is no need to judge this process with a subjective opinion. This is more in line with my premise. Wherein do you find any hint of a should? Then rewinding the film and watching it again and seeing the fact that the configuration plays out a certain way, hence showing that the process was meant to play out that way objectively, and then simply pointing out this fact, isn't at all referential to an intention. The implication of an egoic free will implies that people can't use determinism as a guide on how to act. But I see no reason why not. People can do this very easily, as determinism is just an idea. And from ideas come ideologies. Whether or not anyone actually does this is negligible, for if someone is doing this, it's due to them being caused to do so by some material configuration. And while true that determinism can't literally provide instructions, as determinism is just a concept, the concept of determinism can, nevertheless, still be considered objectively. Determinism can't be considered from the outside because why? Who decided that there's a law dictating that a concept cannot be considered with metacognition? The concept of determinism can be considered from the outside because determinism itself is just an abstraction about a material phenomena. Any concept can be considered from an objective standpoint. Yet, even with all that said, it's not yet proven that any cognitive function will play a role in the interaction of objects. Whether or not one believes cognition plays a role in this or not, and decides to modify their behavior based on this, or not, doesn't change anything. The facts are the facts. How anyone feels about the facts is another issue entirely. But Sage, people making judgments and acting in response to predictions of what should and shouldn't happen is part of what determines what will happen. Wait a minute. People make judgments now? This sure sounds a lot like agency. No. More like circumstances determine people's judgments, and the machine keeps on chugging regardless. And people acting in response to predictions of what should and shouldn't happen being a part of what determines will happen, that isn't proven for reasons previously stated, and contains a lot of shoulds, which have no place in the equation. This assertion holds the implication of intention playing a role somewhere. So any objections to what I'm saying highlights a difficulty in discerning between a concept and an object. As previously stated, there is no evidence to back up any claims that brains affect other brains, that different concepts about reality are indicative of different brain functions, or that thoughts intentionally correspond to actions. And don't bring up evolution, because if evolution shows us anything, it's that life forms operated for billions of years without the benefit of higher cognitive processing. In fact, for most of existence, life didn't think at all, but ran on pure instinct. Which is probably why all actions are initiated prior to conscious function. The advent of thinking has only been around for about 200,000 years, versus about 3.7 billion years of instinct. And so far, most research reinforces this, and points towards the conscious thinking process as being a mere reactionary novelty that emerges after the fact, and nothing more. So any claims about abstractions having the ability to cause and affect objects need some solid evidence that can be verified and falsified. This is what I meant when I said, let us not confuse the narrative of cause and effect with the tangible object of cause and effect. And to clarify, I never said that determinism means performing an action is futile. I said determinism makes subjectively judging anything within the process of determinism pointless and futile. If you know every event is the result of causation, judging any event implies you think the outcome of the event had some other option. There is no other option. Why should another option even be considered? Because of more abstractions? No. Opinions are not facts. You having an opinion might be a fact, but the fact of your opinion doesn't reify the opinion into a fact. This is why abstractions are not part of the equation. The object and action can be measured and verified. The thoughts and feelings about the object and action cannot. Hence, thoughts and feelings are mostly irrelevant to a scientific methodology concerning determinism and causality. So to recap, I first put forth that all actions are determined prior to conscious function, and then pointedly declared communication to be a cognitive function, instituting a standard to work with, hence demanding that any suggestion of otherwise will bear the burden of proof. I don't think there's any need to prove that thoughts and feelings are experienced, for the evidence of the experience is firsthand. Yet no one is asking anyone to prove the experience of them. No one is asking for proof that the brain manifests thoughts either. What needs to be proven is that thoughts, feelings, and communication have the ability to cause or affect objects. This is the claim that is unsubstantiated and bears the burden. And the fact that the results of the neurological experiments communicate information isn't evidence that communication affects objects, especially since the information communicated implies that movement and actions, the proven facilitators of cause and effect, are operating prior to consciousness. To this I say, prove that the data gleaned from this experiment affected an object in any way, without reliance on just abstractions for explanations. What material evidence can be produced to bolster this assumption, other than a subjective opinion that it is so? So that about wraps it up for free will and determinism for now. The contradictions and faulty reasoning espoused in this soft-boiled determinism, this apparent specialty version of determinism, has not been accounted for. It is malformed philosophy. Yet I understand the motives behind its design. It is derived from the desire to have a position that appears aligned to a very objective scientific methodology, yet still wants to leave room for all this touchy-feely subjective crap. And, of course, still leaves tons of room for all the blaming, guilt, castigation, vitriol, and various methods of personal attack, so loved by the fans of this type of dishonest, trollish philosophy. But, Sage, I have a massive amount of evidence. There is a massive amount of evidence of... Yet you will never make a single solitary citation to any of it, other than repeating your own unfounded claims with your own assertions as the reference. This doesn't cut it. You have to cite hard scientific data. And appeals to popularity or authority are not examples of citing scientific data. But wait a minute, Sage. Determinism is not just an idea. It's a description of how the universe functions. This is the main reason why dialogue with a soft-boiled determinist is futile. As not only can they not tell the difference between a concept and an object, they can't even tell the difference between different forms of concepts. Calling it a description doesn't make it any less of a concept. Explanations, descriptions, suppositions, theories, and conclusions are all different varieties of the exact same thing. Abstractions. Knowing this basic fundamental is an elementary prerequisite for engaging in philosophical discourse.